Welcome, focused learners. Today, we're tracing an absolutely epic journey through ancient history. We're talking about how a ruthless, hyper-efficient military machine completely transformed into what might just be the world's very first welfare state. We're looking at the Mauryan Empire. This was the first unification of almost the entire Indian subcontinent under a single centralized power. And it's just this fascinating arc, from brutal conquest to unparalleled administration to an eventual, profound pivot to peace. Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. First, we'll look at forging the Mauryan Empire and then the Mauryan administrative machine. Third, Ashoka and the Kalinga War, leading into the welfare state of Dhamma, and finally, the legacy of the Mauryas.
Section 1. Forging the Mauryan Empire. The rise of Chandragupta and Chanakya.
So, the story really kicks off around 321 BCE. Seizing the political vacuum left by Alexander the Great, you have this incredibly ambitious guy named Chandragupta Maurya and his brilliant strategist, Chanakya. Together, they overthrow the reigning Nanda dynasty and set up a massive new power base. And Chandragupta, he wasted no time pushing his borders west, which put him in direct conflict with the Seleucid Empire, basically the successors to Alexander the Great. Well, Chandragupta won, taking vast territories in the Indus Valley and Afghanistan. And the diplomatic treaty was wild. He literally secured his western borders by trading 500 war elephants to the Greeks. Imagine that. Then, his son Binasara takes the reins around 297 BCE, and he expands the empire deep into the south.
Now, to really wrap your head around the sheer scale of this empire, you have to look at their capital city, Pataliputra. According to Megasthenes, who was a Greek ambassador visiting the city, this place was massive. It was surrounded by 21 miles of walls, defended by nearly 600 watchtowers, and boasted 60 massive gates. Just an absolute marvel of the ancient world that showed off their unparalleled wealth and central organization.
Section 2. The Mauryan Administrative Machine, the Pragmatism of the Arthashastra.
So, you might be wondering, how do you actually control a territory that massive, without the internet or modern roads? Well, you need a highly organized, heavily centralized bureaucracy. And that entire ideology is perfectly captured in the Arthashastra. This is a detailed Sanskrit treatise attributed to Chanakya, Chandragupta's advisor. Now, this wasn't some lofty philosophical text about ideals. It was a gritty, pragmatic, autocratic manual on statecraft. It focused heavily on artha, which basically means prosperity, but achieved through strict regulation, discipline, and absolute control over the state.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how they maintain that absolute internal security. They built an incredibly advanced intelligence network. At the top, you had the Mantri Parishad advising the king, and the Mahamatras handling the complex, day-to-day operations of justice and administration. But beneath them, there was this vast, sophisticated spy network called the Gudha Purushas. This network gathered intelligence on officials, public sentiment, and any potential threats. It was literally an ancient surveillance state, by design.
Of course, running a massive administration and a giant spy network requires a lot of cash. So the Mauryan economy was strictly controlled. They relied on a standard 1/6 land tax on all agricultural produce, but they also maintained absolute state monopolies on the really lucrative industries. We're talking mining, salt, liquor, and arms manufacturing. The state tightly controlled the resources to keep its centralized machine running smoothly.
Section 3. Ashoka and the Kalinga War, the catalyst for change.
When Chandragupta's grandson, Emperor Ashoka, took the throne, he initially followed that exact same expansionist, ruthless playbook, and this culminated in the Kalinga War around 261 BCE. Now, 250,000. That staggering number represents the human cost of his campaign. According to historical accounts, the bloodshed and sheer destruction resulted in the deaths of almost 250,000 people. It's just horrifying to think about.
And the scale of this suffering triggered a profound, literal dark night of the soul for the emperor. The slaughter completely shattered his imperial, militaristic worldview. Seeing this destruction fundamentally changed Ashoka. He was so horrified by his own role in it that he swore off violent conquest altogether. He dedicated himself absolutely to Buddhism and its core ideals of nonviolence.
Section 4. The welfare state of Dhamma, a revolution in governance.
Ashoka didn't just feel guilty and step down. He executed a radical pivot, and this brilliantly illustrates the stark juxtaposition of his reign. On one side, you have the early Mauryan military conquest, relying on massive armies, espionage, and ruthless expansion. But on the other side, you have Ashoka's new doctrine of Dhamma Vijaya. This translates to conquest through righteousness. He literally replaced military coercion with moral persuasion and ethical humanism.
And he turned this ideology into highly practical welfare, essentially building an ancient welfare state long before the modern era even conceived of the idea. I mean, he commanded the building of hospitals, and actually not just for humans, but for animals too. He ordered banyan trees to be planted along roads so weary travelers would have shade. He dug public wells, and he actively promoted humane treatment for servants and prisoners.
To actually execute this whole policy of Dhamma, Ashoka completely restructured the bureaucracy. He appointed special officers called Dhamma Mahamatras. Unlike the early bureaucrats, whose main job was to maximize revenue and maintain control, these new officers were specifically appointed to promote social harmony, moral conduct, and public welfare across this vast empire.
He also heavily promoted religious tolerance, which, was incredibly revolutionary for the ancient world. Through his famous rock and pillar edicts, Ashoka spoke directly to his people. And this quote brings his surprisingly modern voice directly to us. One should honor the other's faith, for by so doing one exalts one's own. It was a highly deliberate effort to harmonize the diverse Buddhist, Hindu, Jain, and other communities living under his rule.
Section 5. The Legacy of the Mauryas. The True Cost of Power. So, while Ashoka's reign was this golden era of peace and unprecedented public welfare, the empire eventually had to face the harsh, unforgiving realities of ancient geopolitics. After Ashoka died in 232 BCE, the fragmentation was swift. The immense size of the territory was just too much for his weaker successors to manage. And there's a really tragic irony here, right? The strict non-violence that made Ashoka's reign so uniquely moral may have left the empire militarily vulnerable, basically lacking the vigor to defend itself. Ultimately, in 185 BCE, the final Mauryan emperor was assassinated by his own general, Pushyamitra Shunga, which shattered the unified subcontinent for centuries to come.
Let's move to our final point, because this leaves us with one of history's most fascinating contrasts: Chanakya's ruthless statecraft versus Ashoka's compassionate welfare state. It begs a really provocative question. Was Ashoka's shift to moral governance the ultimate display of imperial strength, proving that an empire could actually be ruled by ethics rather than the sword? Or was it the seed of the empire's eventual decline, leaving it unable to survive in a violent world? It's this incredibly complex relationship between morality and power that we are literally still debating today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you in the next one.